It's the fall of 2004. I've recently gotten tenure at this best of universities, and I'm on my way home from school one day when I hear a story on NPR, of all venues, about the release of a game called Halo 2. I had been a gamer as a kid, Pong in the Magnavox version, Atari, ColecoVision, Intellivision, Commodore 64, VIC-20, Apple II gamer. And so I was there kind of at the beginning, but when I got to college in my senior year, I played a little bit of Super Mario and Double Dragon with a dorm mate. And then I went on to grad school, where it was quickly clear that I didn't have the budget to continue to be a gamer. So with the exception of a little bit of Age of Empires, I'd been out of gamer culture for about 10 years when I heard this story on NPR. And I later had the privilege to meet two of the people who had been responsible for planting that story. They happened to work for Microsoft. And it worked on me because I was blown away by the description in the story of what the Halo-verse was all about. This basically mythological construction that Microsoft and Bungie had come up with for the entertainment of the new generation of science fiction players. So I went immediately, having a little bit more disposable income than I had when in graduate school, to the nearest big box store. And since it was November, the month of my birth, I purchased an Xbox and Halo 2, and then headed home and told my wonderful and understanding wife that she'd just bought me the best birthday present ever. So, Halo blew me away. The Halo-verse dominated my dreams for weeks, and I began to want to try to figure out what it was about this, what seemed to me, new kind of story that was so resonant and so powerful for a guy who loves mythology as much as I do. And as I researched into it and actually brought my Xbox to class for the teaching value of it, really more the titillation value of it, I realized all of a sudden that it was not new. That in fact, the power of the storytelling that you find in Halo and in Double Dragon and in Super Mario is really, really, really old. Now, I wasn't the very first person to draw this connection. I think the first person to write about it was Janet Murray, the game scholar, in her groundbreaking book, Hamlet on the Holodeck. But being a classicist, it turned out that the thing went much, much deeper. So what you have to know about the Iliad and the Odyssey is that the big books that we assign in civilization courses are actually fossils. They're fossils of what was once a living tradition of epic composition, in which, in the days before writing, the bards had to recompose the story anew every night. So the stories of Achilles and Odysseus, they're originally things that bards sang from their memory, recomposing them as they went, because there's no writing. They have to make them up anew and differently every time, exactly the same way a player playing through a level of Halo can't play it the same way twice. They're using the materials that are there on the game disc the same way the bards use the materials in their memories. And the kind of storytelling, the kind of immersion that is happening in games like Halo and Pokemon is a re-invocation, let's say, of the epic tradition from 2,500 years ago and more. So this becomes quickly a really interesting way to talk to gamers, among others, about how what they're doing is part of this epic tradition that's tremendously old. And you quickly learn that gamers actually don't want to be told that their gaming has anything to do with anything that they might learn in school. But beyond that, it's a way to bring that passion of gaming to people who might not yet be gamers or might be thinking about becoming gamers, and reassure them that there may be something that's old and humanistic about it. But that's not why this ends up being a talk that's appropriate for a focus on the future conference. That's what we get to when we get to Plato. Because, as is fairly famous in Plato's Republic, he decides that he is not going to let Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, into his ideal city, the one that he's constructing with the help of Socrates and Socrates' interlocutors in the Republic. Homer gets thrown out, and he gets thrown out on the basis of this thing called mimesis. This gets really complicated, but mimesis, my favorite way of thinking about it, is playing pretend. The problem with Homer is it's a kind of playing pretend that, because it constitutes basically the entirety of Athenian education in the time of Plato, it's teaching everybody the wrong lesson. Now, we have to backtrack a little bit and look at Odysseus and think about why it would be that Plato would want to throw Odysseus and his tradition, the Homeric tradition, out of the ideal city. Well, we have this precious scene in the Odyssey. It's a scene where actually the stories that we think of as the Odyssey, the Bag of Winds, the cannibals, the Cyclops, all of that stuff is the tales that Odysseus narrates about himself to his audience on this island called Phaeacia. And the reason that he narrates it is that he's made a bargain with the bard of the Phaeacians. This is this precious character named Demodocus that is our best indication of what the life of an ancient bard actually was like. And he makes this bargain, and what he does is he turns Demodocus into an Xbox. And he says, Demodocus, do you happen to have the Trojan War disc in your disc tray? And Demodocus says yes, and Odysseus says, well, do you have that bit, and here he's doing like a controller, do you have that bit when Odysseus wins the Trojan War? And Demodocus says, well, yes, okay, and then he goes on and sings this song, the story about how Odysseus is the one who wins the Trojan War. Odysseus puts on this show while that song is being sung of weeping copiously, until finally the king of the Phaeacians says, we have to know who you are. And so Odysseus makes himself into the Xbox and lets the Phaeacians play him on these amazing adventures that he tells them. And he plays it so well that he ends up the winner of the game, because by the end of the night, he has enough presents piled up from the Phaeacians that he can go home in style and repair all of the damage that those horrible suitors have done in his absence. So Odysseus uses this immersive power. Well, Plato looks at this and says, well, do we really want our Athenians, our potential philosopher kings, learning to be as cunning and tricky and manipulative with the power of pretend, the power of Homer, as Odysseus was? No. So he throws Homer out of the ideal city, and he distills it all into this famous image, the image of the cave. The cave is a story about education and the lack of education. Those are the exact words that Socrates uses to introduce the story. Well, who's educated and who isn't? Is it the prisoners who are tied up, or is it the guy who goes out? The point of it is that they're both educated and they're both uneducated, because the prisoners who see only the shadows think they're educated. They have the typical Athenian education. They know Homer. They have that incredible immersive education. But the guy going up to the surface is the only one who, according to Plato, is really educated. There are two things everybody, I think, gets wrong about the cave. One is that nobody notices that they actually have games down there. It's a little like Duck Hunt. They have to figure out what shadow is coming next and what order they're coming in, and that's how they win honors. So when the guy comes back down and he gets owned trying to play these games because his eyes haven't adjusted, that's when they say, out of here, and kill him. The second thing that everybody gets wrong is everybody thinks that Plato is saying here that mimesis is completely bad. What he's actually saying is that mimesis is the most powerful learning tool we have. It's too powerful to be put in the hands of Homer. This is game-based learning. And game-based learning in the form of Plato's dialogues creates the wonderful image that Raphael gives us in the School of Athens. Okay, here's what my colleagues and I have done about it. We've created a 2-year introductory course in Latin, which is a role-playing game wrapped up in an alternate reality game, in which students are on a mission to save the world by finding and interpreting a crucial inscription, the lapis saeculorum, the stone of the ages. But they're also playing as themselves, recruited on a mission to save civilization by learning Latin. And so when they find and interpret that amazing Stone of Ages at the end of the course. They have won the game by telling the story of how they learned Latin and, like the bards of old, saved civilization with the power of their imaginations. Thanks.